Господин представитель, это что, для вас открытие? Весь мир знает, что самая империалистическая держава – это Соединенные Штаты Америки. Об этом все воробьи на крышах чирикают, что самая империалистическая держава, которая поддерживает колониальный режим в колониях, это Соединенные Штаты Америки. А он возмущен. Какая, так сказать, невинность, понимаете, разыгрывается здесь, в то время, когда знает, что эта невинная барышня уже, наверное, десяток имеет детей.
Ich richte diesen Appell an alle unsere Volksgenossen, die an unseren Staat und an unser Reich glauben. Würdest du allein stehen, was wärst du denn auf dieser Welt? Dein Gehalt, dein Lohn, du eine große Gemeinschaft bist, jedem Einzelnen mit verdammt zu lassen. Sage mir nichts, das ist doch prächtig über den Zusammenhang. Du hast nie den Hunger kennengelernt, was würdest du mit mir
too weak to master the new conditions of life, must give way. They must perish in the revolutionary Holocaust. Karl Marx. The left in general fundamentally opposed Nazism, because Hitler had distorted Marxism beyond recognition. Gassing people based on their nationality was absolutely inexcusable. The selection should be based on class. Hitler got it all wrong. Absolutely different people needed to be killed. The only true Marxist country on earth was the Soviet Union. It exterminated strictly according to Marxist teaching the class enemies.
और टूट अंग कहने की रट छोड़ दो, अब वो दौर नहीं रहा। जिहाद का दौर शुरू हो चुका है और तुम्हें 71 का जमाना याद है और आज जिहाद का दौर शुरू हो चुका है। जिहाद के सामने ना रूस ठहर सका ना अमेरिका ठहर सका, इंशाल्लाह इंडिया नहीं ठहरेगा। ये जिहाद का दौर शुरू हो चुका है। जिहाद को दुनिया नहीं जानती, जिहाद को लोग नहीं समझते। अब भाइयों सुन लो, जिहाद मुल्कों की मुल्कों से जंग नहीं होती, फौजों की फौजों से जंग नहीं, असले की असले से जंग नहीं होती। जब जिहाद होता है तो जमीन आसमान के दरमियान जंग होती है, मतलब सारी आसमानों
And good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Cold War Radio, live on our home base, WAAR. We are America Radio, your number one source for streaming political and government talk anywhere. I'm Hutch Bailey Jr., deep down in the bunker in my Smith & Wesson studio in the city of Pittsburgh. And just west of Murmansk, Russia, in the Low Countries, let's welcome Norway to the program. Come in, Radio Norway.
Good evening, Hutch, and good evening to the audience, it's a splendid, a rather cold summer night here, and it is indeed the Low Countries, only 80 meters above sea level here.
Please follow me on Spreaker, ladies and gentlemen. Like the Facebook page, facebook.com/Cold War Radio, 2 A's in war. You can catch the show on Blueberry, Roku, YouTube. Cold War Radio is an iHeartRadio program, and there's also a Cold War Radio app for your iPhone or other smartphone in your respective app stores. It's free. The Cold War Radio patron hotline, 412-567-1460 if you'd like to join this evening's program. The chat room is up on Spreaker. Just go to steelcityresistance.com and catch the show notes links there. If you can help, hit the donate button, but more importantly, if you become a Cold War Radio patron, on the button on the right-hand side, that would be beautiful. If you want to use the postal system, it's Hutch Bailey Jr., P.O. Box 96022, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania 15226, and the email is SCRTV negative. The email is hutch@steelcityresistance.com. I have to fix those show notes, apparently. Norway, in the chat room, Sarah Jane was asking, what is this with the Shaping Our World intro? And that is basically most of the tyrants of the 20th century leading up to where we are today. You had was it Stalin or was it? No, it was
Khrushchev.
Nikita Khrushchev. And then you had Adolf Hitler. You had Flaming Imam. And you had, before that, you had basically Russian communist propaganda. And then you had a Chinese fight song. And to top it all off, Donald Trump leads the way with Hail to the Chief. So that's what you heard there. This is our segment on Monday that we do Shaping Our World, where we try to bring forgotten history back to the program, and we will not disappoint this evening. Norway, what are we going to talk about tonight?
You know what, Hutch? I think that is an excellent question. The one that was posted in the chat room, because we are actually, and it's tuition free. That's the best thing of it all. We are trying to bring the best tidbits of history so history doesn't repeat itself. And tonight we're going to talk about white slavery.
And I think one of the things that prompted this discussion is the absolutely one-sided narrative that is talked about in the West when it comes to slavery. And that is the enslaving of black African slaves, which originated with Arab Muslims, by the way, in collusion, if we're going to use that word these days, with some tribes in Africa. But we're going to cover something today that's never talked about. It's absolute. We had to have a discussion on whether or not we were going to use the images that we used for tonight, and decided that we were going to. It's history. But a lot of people don't realize that. And one of the questions that we'd like to kind of entice you with, and we're going to get to this story about 2/3 of the way through the program, but Norway, what do we want to ask our listeners? What is the question? What do we want them to call in about tonight?
Well, this might seem unrelated, but our question for our listeners tonight is, do you have ancestors that came to America on the Mayflower or on any of the other early colonial ships that came over? So call us on 412-567-1460 and tell us your story. The number is 412-567-1460.
Absolutely. Now let's go to the hotbed of leftist ideology and everything anti-American. And my father actually graduated from this school before he went to work in the swamp. Georgetown University Associate Professor Jonathan Brown is one of the most influential clerics in America, according to investigateproject.org. He holds the Saudi-financed Prince Alawid bin Talal Chair of Islamic Civilization in the School of Foreign Service. a convert to Islam, he is a frequent speaker with Islamist groups, including the Islamic Circle of North America, ICNA, the Council on American Islamic Relations, CARE, and the International Institute of Islamic Thought, the IIT. In this February 2017 lecture, Jonathan Brown argues that slavery is not inherently evil. And we'll listen to a clip about being familiar with this individual. It's not particularly evil unless it's against a black person or in the United States. But let's listen to Georgetown's finest. Clip 1, please.
I don't think it's morally evil to own somebody, because we own lots of people all around us, and we're owned by people. And this obsession with thinking of slavery as property, and it's treating human beings as sin, as things that is this just inconceivable sin. I think that's actually a really odd and unhelpful way to think about slavery, and it kind of gets you locked in this way of thinking where if you talk about ownership and people, that you've already transgressed some moral boundary that you can't come back from. But I don't think that's true at all. If you're Muslim,
You had slaves.
the Prophet of God, ﷺ, had slaves. He had slaves. There's no denying that. Are you more morally mature than the Prophet of God? No, you're not.
There you have it. What a guy. Associate Professor Jonathan Brown of Georgetown University, telling you slavery is not evil. Go ahead, the Prophet did it, so we should do it. What do you think will be your destiny if this guy gets into power?
Oh, you're absolutely right. I mean, this guy has no problem with female genital mutilation. And again, I've listened to some of his arguments, and when a skillful interviewer eases it over to slavery in the United States, he changes his tune rather. And that's the way these leftists are. That's the way they operate. It's all relative. But something that the listeners know, the long-term listeners know, I'm going to break that tonight. I don't normally, poor Norway, he didn't know this. I don't do Glenn Beck a whole lot. But what we're going to do is we have...
Neither do I. I'm no big fan anymore, but I used to be.
I was too. And David Barton, he ran the PAC, the Keep the Promise PAC with Ted Cruz. But anyway, that doesn't matter, because let's listen to a clip of an interview that Glenn Beck did with David Barton, an esteemed historian, no question, about this. Let's listen. This is all about education.
As a reminder that Islam has always been a part of America. The first Muslim ambassador to the United States from Tunisia was hosted by President Jefferson, who arranged a sunset dinner for his guests because it was Ramadan, making it the first known iftar at the White House more than 200 years ago.
That was a special moment. It was a sunset cruise. And they held hands, and it was so beautiful. By the way, David Barton, in case you don't know for some reason, David is the founder and president of wallbuilders.com. David, go ahead. Come on.
Let's take this thing, because what's happening now, and you covered the Muslim Brotherhood, what's happening, it's a historic organization that goes back a long time, and they're really trying to get a foothold in America and make us think that they're mainstream and normal. And so part of what you get is the president saying that. I was talking to, we have a radio program, General Jerry Boykin was just on it, and he's the guy who ran Delta and everything. He says so far, in just the last few years, we have 27 judges who have used Sharia law in 23 states for court decisions. So Sharia law is already in effect. So people of Oklahoma vote and they say, we don't want Sharia law, and of course that gets taken to court, and the judge says, yeah, you can't have an amendment that says you don't want Sharia law. So this thing is really creeping in. Obama's one, got another clip to straighten out. Jefferson, everybody keeps trying to tie to Jefferson. You know, you get Jefferson's out there, and so Obama says Jefferson did the first iftar dinner. Let me take you back to another reference to Jefferson, and it deals with Keith Ellison. Keith Ellison is the first modern Muslim elected to Congress back in 2007. And you'll see a picture here of Keith Ellison, and he's got his hand on a Koran, being sworn in. It hadn't happened before in America, so he's being sworn on this Koran. And in being sworn in on this Koran, and you see a close-up of here, you can see on the back what it is. It's Jefferson's Koran. It's from 1746. And so we got a quote from, a great quote here from Ellison. Let me show you this quote we got.
There he is.
See, there's there, and see his hand on it. And so you see a close-up of it.
Look at Nancy Pelosi right after plastic surgery.
Here's what he says. The Quran is definitely an important historical document in our national history, and it demonstrates that Jefferson was a broad visionary thinker. It would have been something that contributed, the Quran would have been something that contributed to his own thinking.
You know what? I agree with that. I say we take that from Keith Ellison. I agree with every word of that.
I do too. I do.
Good.
I totally agree, just not the way he meant it.
Yeah,
it's totally opposite of what he meant.
Right.
Because when you take those two things and put them together, how does Jefferson get tagged with this Quran thing? Why are they using him to justify what's happening with Islam in the United States? And that's where you got to go back, because we've had, what we're doing right now at the military is really America's second war on terror. The first war on terror we had lasted 32 years, went through 4 different presidencies and the Continental Congress. So you have to go back to where did we get involved in our first war against Islamic terrorism and radical Islam. You have to go back to the end of the American Revolution. 1783, we signed the peace treaty. We've been up to our ears fighting the British and haven't had time to see anything else. But overseas, we've been attacked by Islam. And so what happened was these 3 guys you see here, these are the first 3 ambassadors sent by the Continental Congress to negotiate with Muslim extremists in Europe. So you've got Jefferson, you got Franklin, you got Adams. These 3 guys are sent to Europe. And at this point, we don't have a Navy. The French were our Navy. You know, we had the British Navy. Now we separated from so these guys are trying to go settle things. And what's really interesting is after these guys have been in Europe for 2 years negotiating with Muslim extremists, Adams and Jefferson get down with the Triple N ambassador, and they said, you know, we've kind of developed a relationship of trust here. We don't understand. Why do you keep attacking America? We haven't done a thing to you. We've come after you in no way. We've created no offense for you. Why in the heck do you keep attacking? Because everywhere we would send an American ship that had an American flag on it, these guys are going after it. They're hitting Americans. They're capturing Americans. They found they could hold them as slaves. Then they found they could sell them. They would get about $1 million a ship for ransoming the captain. And so Jefferson and Adams say, what's up with this? Look at the answer of the ambassador. Here's his explanation of why all these unprovoked attacks against America. This is what he said. The ambassador answered us that it was founded on the laws of their prophet Muhammad, that it was written in their Quran that all nations who should not have acknowledged their authority were sinners. It was their right and their duty to make war on them wherever they could be found and to make slaves of all they could take as prisoners, and that every Muslim who should be slain in battle was sure to go to paradise. So,
you know how I learned this? I first stumbled onto this on there is a monument that was in front of the Capitol. You probably know this, and it was moved to Annapolis. And
all right, so ladies and gentlemen, there you have the reference to Thomas Jefferson that they always bring up when they're spouting their tequila. And you can see the reason that he had a Quran was because he wanted to analyze these people that would not yield because of their religion. Their ambassador told him that. Madison, and it's just for Keith Ellison to come in there and do that, it just shows why we do this show, Norway.
Yeah, I mean, Keith Ellison, there's another guy that fell out of this stupid tree and hit every branch down, or he's hoping that you guys are that guy that fell out of the tree and hit every stupid tree and hit every branch on the way down, because here he is. He's sworn in on a stack of Quran, which in reality was made to warn Americans about Islam.
Absolutely, and I feel like I should have had a clip of the Marine Corps hymn because Jefferson's answer was to create the Marine Corps, and if you listen to the hymn and you listen to that lecture by David Barton, From the Halls of Montezuma to the Shores of Tripoli. Let's talk, Norway, about the forgotten European slaves of black Islamic Barbary North Africa and Islamic Ottoman Turkey.
Yeah, when I did research for this this episode, I really tried to find some figures, and they vary, but the low end is 1.25 million. But then it goes upwards because countries like Poland had 3 million people taken out as slaves. So that 1.25 million estimate is in the low end, I would say.
And like you said, it may in fact have been closer to the same volume estimated in the African slave trade of its own people, 140 million. And you have Dr. Andrew Bostom, the author of 3 books, The Legacy of Jihad, The Legacy of Islamic Anti-Semitism, and Sharia versus Freedom, brought to our attention that these historic references reveal, like you said, in Poland, over 3 million. I mean, these people were captured during the Muslim, African, and Ottoman slave raids, and if a small country like Poland lost 3 million people, and consider its position far north of the main central points of Muslim slave raids, you can only imagine what must have happened in the rest of Europe, in France, Spain, Portugal, everywhere.
Absolutely, and I came across this, and I have tried desperately to find that article, because it was an article about a slave raid on the west coast of Norway, where several villages were ransacked and emptied of people. And we call it, we actually have a Norwegian / Icelandic word for it. We called it Tyrkerrane, or Tyrkjarani, which is the Icelandic word, which in essence means the robbery or the ransacking by the Turks.
The Ohio State University history professor Robert Davis describes the white slave trade as minimized by most modern historians in his book Christian Slaves, Muslim Masters, White Slavery in the Mediterranean, the Barbary Coast in Italy, 1500 to 1800, published by Palgrave Macmillan. He estimates that 1 to 1.25 million white Christian Europeans were enslaved in North Africa from the beginning of the 16th century to the middle of the 18th by slave traders from Tunis, Algiers, and Tripoli alone. And these numbers do not include the European people which were enslaved by Morocco and other raiders and traders of the Mediterranean Sea coast.
Yeah, absolutely. The 16th and 17th century custom statistics suggest that Istanbul's additional slave import from the Black Sea may have totaled around 2.5 million from 1450 to 1700. And the markets declined after the loss of the Barbary Wars, and finally ended in the 1930s when the region was conquered by France.
Let's pick up a little bit more of this interview with David Barton. Clip 3.
You get this answer that says, hey, we're required to do this about the Quran. And it's like these guys go, wait a minute. There's a religious book that says you go to heaven for killing people and going to war against people. And they go, nah. And so Jefferson says, I got to read this for myself. Well, there's your first introduction to the Quran. Jefferson wants to see for himself if there really is such a wacky position that you go to heaven for killing people and creating war. And so that's the first exposure against. Now, we'll come back to that later because he's not president yet. So all this is going on. We don't have a Navy. We don't have an Army. Founding fathers absolutely deplore a standing Army. They don't want a permanent military. They condemn that in the Declaration. They did not allow that in the Constitution. They didn't forbid it, but they didn't establish it. Now we go to George Washington being president. The only way we've been able to find to keep these guys from attacking us is we have to bribe them. If we pay them millions upon millions, then so it's extortion. We're in serious blackmail. By the time you get to the 7th year of Washington's 8 years, in his 7th year, Washington is now paying 16% of the entire federal budget to keep these guys from attacking us. So 1/6 of the federal budget. 1/6 of the federal budget is going to keep Islamic extremists from attacking us. This is where Washington's had it, because he's a military guy. He likes to fight. He's already won battles. He's been a guy all of his life fighting battles. Look what he says about. He's fed up with these terrorists. This is the quote that he uses. He said, "Would to heaven we had a navy able to reform those enemies to mankind, or to crush them into non-existence. I wish I had some means to go over there and thump them." That's the first time he goes before Congress and says, "Okay, we need to change our position on a standing army," because we always thought we'd get attacked here, and if we did, all the farmers go home and get their squirrel guns, we'd fight off the British again. We didn't think about having to defend America overseas.
No president right now would say that.
That's right.
No president right now would say that.
But see, that's what he was. Mm-hmm. And that's why they didn't want a standing army. Now they have to reconsider. So he says, appropriate money, let me build a navy. Congress, here's his policy. Here's why he wanted a navy. This is what Washington said. He said, To be prepared for war is one of the most effectual means of preserving peace. If we want to end this war, we got to be able to fight a war, and we can't do it. So Congress, that's exactly right, strength. So Congress appropriates the money, they give him, but he's out of office. So now John Adams comes in as president. John Adams comes in, it is John Adams who builds the Navy. John Adams is known as the father of the American Navy. He's got a Navy. Let's go end this thing. He does not end it. Why not end it? John Adams, who's first diplomat, now he's done this for 15 years, vice president under Washington. He says, I know these guys. He said, if we get involved in a conflict with them, he said, it's going to last forever. He says, I don't think the American people have the stomach to take on Islamic terrorism because it'll last a long time. This is not a quick fight like the British. So he refused to do that. Now, at the time he went out of office, we're now up to 20% of the federal budget being spent to pay off these guys to keep them from attacking us, and that's not even working all the time. They're still attacking.
All right. So, ladies and gentlemen, there you go. This is not something that is new. And we've been saying that from the beginning of the show, way back in 2010. But a little bit on how they did this. The Barbary Muslim pirates kidnapped Europeans from ships in North Africa's coastal waters, the Barbary coast. They also attacked and pillaged the Atlantic coastal fishing villages and towns in Europe, enslaving the inhabitants. And this could be how Norway, your villages were attacked. Although that's quite a trek. Villages and towns on the coast of Italy, Spain, Portugal, and France were the hardest hit. Muslim slave raiders also seized people as far afield as Britain, Ireland, and Iceland. 412-567-1460. If you have any comments or questions or stories about this, please feel free to call. We will
call us and tell us if you think slavery is okay, if you think that what is taught in American universities, no less, by the professor Jonathan Brown, like we heard, is this morally right? Is this okay?
And you know, there's people out there. If you, when I was searching for audio clips for the program, there was several that had imams on there, and they were explaining to their lapdog Western reporters how it was okay, and how one even said that this was the result of war, and we didn't want to put him in prison, and he was referencing Guantanamo Bay, kind of, and he said, so, you know, we give them to a family, and they're well treated and clothed, and just all a bunch of bull. But that being said, it happened. Let's listen to the rest of this interview with David Barton.
I would like to talk to you about sex slavery, in particular, the sex slavery of Islamic State.
So now we come to Jefferson. Jefferson, the president, goes in. Jefferson goes in and he says, I've had it. I'm not going to pay. And by the way, we were already having tax protests then because we're paying so much of our taxes to pay off these terrorists that it's costing Americans. And so you're getting tax protests over this, the fact that we're not fighting, we're paying extortion money. Jefferson says, I'm not paying any more bribes. At that point, two of the Islamic nations declared war on the United States. First official war declared against us as an independent nation was when we stopped paying tribute and stopped negotiating and stopped playing around with extortion money. And so Tripoli declared war and Algiers went to the point of declaring war. So we got two declaring war. And he says, who cares? And so he takes this brand new Navy he's got and he ships this Navy overseas because there's 4 nations going after us, actually 5. When we started shipping the Navy, 3 of them backed off and then 4 backed off, and so we only had Tripoli to deal with. And so you see the American Navy sailing over there, brand new Navy, first time we've had our own Navy. They get there and there's some cool pictures here. You'll see a picture of the fighting that's going on. It was hand-to-hand combat, close quarters, the same kind of thing. See, here's the Navy sailing out. They're headed over to North Africa, to Tripoli specifically, and here's the type of battles you see going on. And so this is Stephen Decatur, a young lieutenant who's there engaged in all this battle. And so this is fighting to keep them from attacking Americans because they're having their way with everything going on. This is young Stephen Decatur. So at this point, Jefferson puts military troops on the ground for 5 years over there. That's where we get our Marine Corps hymn. Our Marine Corps hymn says, from the halls of Montezuma to the shores of Tripoli. That's the first war on terror. The first time we had to fight Islamic extremists, and that's the Marine Corps hymn. Halls of Montezuma to the shores of Tripoli. Now, this thing is over in 1805. So now we come back home. We've got a time of peace, if you will. And in 1806, this is printed. Now, this is the first Quran printed in the United States. This is 1806, is it printed? Jefferson is our president here. And here's the first American edition. The Quran. It says right here. Now, interesting thing, why print a Quran? Because we've been fighting these guys for 5 years, and people are going, what in the heck are these guys thinking? Well, if you want to know what they're thinking, let's read their book. So here we come out with I got to read you the introduction. This is...
You're going to love this.
Here's the editor's introduction, and it says, this is a book. This book is a long conference between God, the angels, Muhammad, and on through it goes. Set it up. When you get done with this book, this is what it says. You'll find, he says, you'll wonder that such absurdities have infected the best part of the world. They're saying, you will not believe what these guys believe. When you read this book, you won't believe the absurdities that have infected that much of the world, and you will avouch that the knowledge of what is contained in this book will render that law contemptible. If you read this, you will have contempt for Islamic law. And that's why they put this out, because we've just gone through 5 years of fighting these guys, and we need American people to know what this is all about, because we didn't start this. They're the one, and they said it's in our Quran. We do this because it's in our book. We're only doing what our book tells us, and so Americans needed to know what the book said. So that's where you get it.
What happened after that?
Well, what happened after that was we had a period of peace, and that period of peace lasted, and then you come to James Madison as president. And James Madison gets involved in the War of 1812. And so the War of 1812, we're fighting the British. And don't ever think that foreign nations don't watch what's happening with our domestic policy. We were all tied up fighting the British. Our Navy's tied up. Here's Perry and Lake Erie, the battle. We're all tied up fighting the British. Islamic extremists say, hey, we can attack again because their Navy is all tied up. So they start whacking American interest again. And Madison couldn't do a thing about it because we couldn't carry on a war on two fronts. We could only carry on one front. But as soon as that treaty was signed, 1815, John Quincy Adams negotiated the treaty. Madison loads up the Navy again and sends them back overseas. Now that young Lieutenant Stephen Decatur is now made the commander, taking the Navy and the Marines back overseas. And for two years, they thump Algiers, and they just beat their brains in. And after 2 years of that, and here's some more of that hand-to-hand combat that you see Stephen Decatur again leading these groups. After 2 years, they came back to the table, and at the end of 2 years, they signed the peace treaty. And after 32 years of having the conflict with these guys, we finally reached a period of somewhat peace. But their position was, we always, and this is General William Eaton, who led the first expedition under Jefferson, had been a diplomat before, and he said the problem is they consider Americans a weak sect of Christians because we won't fight. And since we won't fight, they're willing to come after us. And so that's why Jefferson said, I'm willing to fight. And that's where things turned around. After we showed a willingness to fight, they left us alone.
So there is an inherent lesson within that, and that's why we made an exception and played so much of that. You have to be willing to fight. It's all they understand. And this is the same with most tyrannies and most bullies on the schoolyard. I mean, this is all they will respond to. And you can see the effects, and I know this isn't right on target with what we're talking about, but you can see the effects in the Middle East and in Europe because of the inaction or actual help that the Obama administration and the left, the Democrat Party, gave the Muslim Brotherhood and ISIS and Al-Qaeda and everybody else. They turned a blind eye everywhere.
Absolutely, and it was said here in one of these clips that the Muslims regarded Americans as a weak Christian sect, and that was the go signal to start hammering American trading ships relentlessly, and it was staggering. The amount of shipping they took, and it made a really, really serious dent into the trade. And I mean, we talked about the fall of the Roman Empire, both the West Roman Empire, the East Roman Empire, and this isn't so many years after the really violent death of the Roman Empire, which was brought on by Islam breaking out of the Arabic Peninsula and attacking trading ships in the Mediterranean, and they wreaked havoc. you see the number of shipwrecks drops like a stone. And the only reason for that is this relentless war in the Mediterranean, which incidentally also was important to the fledgling nation of the United States of America.
Now, what I did, ladies and gentlemen, in story 2, in the show notes links available at steelcityresistance.com, there are references that you can reference yourself. I'll name a couple: Slavery and White Guilt by James Eden, Barbary Pirates, African Slave Traders and Their White European Slaves, Grumpy Opinions, America and the Barbary Pirates, An International Battle Against an Unconventional Foe, from the Library of Congress, British Slaves on the Barbary Coast from the BBC, and it goes on, and they've been trying to hide this and cover it up. It's just absolutely hideous. Let's listen to Dr. Warner on sex slavery. Excuse me, clip number 6.
I would like to talk to you about sex slavery, in particular, the sex slavery of Islamic State. Islamic State publishes videos and books. The books are really more magazines, and they're found on the web. The title of one of them is Dabiq, and in volume 9 they have a 6-page essay on sex slavery. And the essay is written, or at least the author's name, is a woman's name. Now, the reason that they're talking about sex slavery is that they practice sex slavery. That is, they capture both Christian and Yazidi women, and if they're over the age of 9, they're put on the slave block and sold, for not a lot of money actually, in order to be used for sexual pleasure. Now, what Islamic State does in this magazine is to point out that what they're doing is pure Islam. Now, in America, Obama tells us that Islamic State is neither Islamic nor a state, and yet they are a state and they are pure Islam. Indeed, if you look at what all the different Islamic groups are, the most pure in its Islam is Islamic State. And so they give all the classical arguments for sexual slavery, and they point out that Allah condones it because there are 4 verses in the Quran which mention those whom your right hand possesses, which in this case are female slaves. They also bring up the point that Muhammad had not 1, not 2, but more than 1 sex slave. Indeed, Muhammad's favorite sexual companion was named Mary. She was a Coptic Christian, described as being fair, that is, light-colored skin, and with wavy dark hair. She gave him a son, Ibrahim, which none of Muhammad's other wives out of the harem in Medina ever did. So, they mention that sex slavery is condoned by Allah, and that Muhammad practiced sex slavery, and indeed they go further to point out that nearly all of Muhammad's companions were and had sex slaves. So the idea that sex slavery somehow or another is not Islamic, what Islamic State is saying is, yes it is, it's pure Islam. What are you talking about? As a matter of fact, part of the rant in this article is not about Kafirs, but instead how stupid Muslims are for stepping away from the real Islam, and that Islamic State practices the real Islam. Now, by the way, it's interesting to note that the first sex slaves of Muhammad were Jews. Now, one of the reasons that slavery within itself is desirable is that in order to be released from slavery, you need to convert to Islam. And indeed, Islamic State says that some of these women have become pregnant and converted to Islam, and now then they're married off to be good Muslim wives. So therefore, sexual slavery is virtuous because it brings women to Islam and produces more Muslim children. Now, for those Muslims who say that Islamic State is not Islamic, they're wrong. Islamic State gets an A+ on the doctrine. One of the most interesting paragraphs is written by this woman, and I'm going to quote what she says. I and those with me at home prostrated to Allah in gratitude that the first sex slave girl entered our home. Yes, we thanked our Lord for having let us live in the day when we saw the kufr, the unbeliever, humiliated and its banner destroyed. Here we are today, and after centuries reviving prophetic sunnah, which is both the Arab and non-Arab enemies had buried, by Allah we brought back from the edge of the sword, and we did so not through pacifism, negotiations, democracy, or elections. We established it according to the prophetic way, with blood-red swords, not with fingers for voting or tweeting. So take that, critics of Islamic State. Islamic State is pure Islam. And that's what they say. Sex slavery is pure Islam, and so their practice of sexual slavery is pure Islam itself. Study Islam.
Dr. Bill Warner, ladies and gentlemen, one of the most esteemed scholars on the subject matter that we have, and we may get him on the show. We'll have to see how that works. But this is all, speaking of history and things like that, but I just wanted to bring to your attention that things never change. This is from last year, ladies and gentlemen, the last 2 years. It still goes on to this day.
August 2014, a Yazidi representative makes this desperate plea for help from the Iraqi parliament.
Our women have been taken as slaves and sold into slavery at the market in Raqqa. Gentlemen, as we speak, there is a genocide going on against the Yazidis.
That was over a year ago, but the situation for one of Iraq's oldest minorities hasn't improved. 18-year-old Jinan is one of those Yazidi girls captured and sold into slavery by the Islamic State organization.
We spent 3 months in a house with the two masters who had bought me. It was a difficult time. They tortured us. They wanted to convert us by force, and they demanded that we pray and read the Quran. When we refused, they beat us. They chained us outside in full sun and made us drink water with dead mice floating in it. And they threatened to use electricity to torture us.
Jinan was held for 3 months last year. Now she's written a book about her captivity. In it, she describes being taken to a slave market among dozens of other women.
The fighters circulated among us, laughing raucously, pinching our backsides. One man complained, saying, "That one has big breasts, but I want a Yazidi with blue eyes and pale skin. Those are the best, apparently. I'm willing to pay the price."
Predominantly ethnic Kurds, the Yazidis' faith is based on ancient Persian Zoroastrianism. To the Islamic State group, they are at best pagans, at worst devil worshippers. And according to its ideology, that means Yazidi men can be killed and women raped as sexual slaves.
These men are not human. They think only of death, of killing. They take drugs non-stop. They want to avenge themselves on the whole world.
Even Yazidi children are not spared. They're taken to so-called military academies where they're indoctrinated in IS ideology. The boys are taught to be soldiers, the girls about being jihadi brides. For Jinan, this story ended happily.
One day they had been on the front line and they came back to the house at around 8 p.m. They were tired and fell asleep. Around midnight, when we were sure they were deep asleep, the 5 other Yazidi women and I climbed out of the window. Thanks to a mobile phone stolen from the house, we were able to get in touch with a Yazidi fighter who guided us over the phone. We walked for 5 hours until we arrived at the foot of Mount Sinjar. There we met up with the Yazidi fighter.
But Jinan was one of the lucky ones. More than 2,000 Yazidi women and girls are still being held captive by IS, and more than 400,000 Yazidis have been displaced in the Kurdistan region. Life for them, like for Jinan, continues in refugee camps like this one.
So it's still going on, ladies and gentlemen. It's not it wasn't just a fad or anything like that. This is an ideology backed up with a sick guy named Muhammad that everybody's trying to imitate. And with Aisha and the rest of his pedophile targets, you can see why everywhere you look in the news, there's another Islamic immigrant or whatever that's raping little kids. Norway, we have a phenomenal story that I don't think a lot of people know about. Let's talk a little bit about early America and England and the Muslim Barbary pirates.
Yeah, it's. I was when I found this story, I was really dumbfounded. I really had to read it twice to really get that this happened. But on November the 21st, 1620, the Pilgrims signed the Mayflower Compact and began their Plymouth colony. 5 years later, in 1625, the Pilgrims filled 2 ships with dried fish and beaver skins and sent them back to England to trade for much needed supplies. Governor William Bradford wrote in his history of the Plymouth settlement, the adventurers sent over 2 fishing ships. The pinnace was ordered to load the core fish to bring home to England, and besides, she had some 800 pounds of beaver, as well as other furs to a good value from the plantation. The captain, seeing so much lading, wished to put aboard a bigger ship for greater safety, but Mr. Edward Winslow, their agent in business, was bound in a bond to send it to London in the small ship. The captain of the big ship towed the small ship at his stern all the way over. So they went joyfully home together and had such fine weather that he never cast her off till they were well within the England Channel, almost in sight of Plymouth. But even there, she was unhappily taken by a Turkish man-of-war, carried off to Salar in Morocco, where the captain and crew were made slaves. Thus all their hopes were dashed, and the joyful news they meant to carry home was turned to heavy tidings.
Unbelievable. And I'm sure a lot of people, I never knew this. I mean, when I heard this, I was stunned. And it gets even better, ladies and gentlemen. Giles Milton wrote in White Gold the extraordinary story of Thomas Pellow and North Africa's 1 million European slaves, published in the UK by Hodder and Stoughton Limited, 2004, that in 1625, Muslim corsair pirates sailed up the Thames River and raided England. They attacked, 1625, ladies and gentlemen. That's not that long ago. They attacked the coast of Cornwall, captured 60 villagers at Mounts Bay and 80 at Looe. Muslims took Lundy Island in Bristol Channel and raised the standard of Islam. I mean, this is not in history books, at least not the schools I attended.
Absolutely. I never heard about this. Well, actually, that's not true. Before this show, I spent days looking for an article I read probably 12, 15 years ago, and I could not find it. It's not in electronic form, but it was a wonderful compilation of all cities and villages in Europe that were raided. And they also had a really long list of villages in England and Ireland that were raided.
In 1627, Algerian and Ottoman Muslim pirates, led by Murat Reis the Younger, raided Iceland, carrying into slavery an estimated 400 from the cities of Reykjavik, Österland, and Vestmannaeyjar. How do you say that properly?
Vestmannaeyjar.
That was close. I'm just the ugly American here. One captured girl who had been made a slave concubine in Algeria was rescued back by King Christian IV of Denmark. In 1631, the entire village of Baltimore, Ireland, was captured by Muslim pirates led by Murat Reis the Younger. Only 2 ever returned. And that's from Des Elkin, The Stolen Village, Baltimore, and the Barbary Pirates, published by O'Brien Press in 2006. So apparently there is some renewed interest in these things. But I'll say again, and I have to tell you, up until about 2010, 2009, I was completely ignorant of this. I mean, they've done such a brilliant job of whitewashing this and hiding this, and you have to think that members of Congress and the media of higher learned stature have to have known about some of these things. I mean, it's not like it's hidden that you can't find it. It's just not presented anywhere.
No, exactly, and it doesn't fit the leftist narrative. And this is really at the core of everything, because the leftist narrative defines a slave as a black man.
Yes, exactly. The point of this whole show. Thanks for bringing us back there. Go ahead.
Yeah, and I mean, when you look at Thomas Jefferson's Bible, I mean, if you read the preface, it would take a smart man 2 seconds, or a smart woman 2 seconds, to realize that this is a warning scripture.
Absolutely, there's no question. I mean, and some of the ways that the left collaborates with these people, this is the part that blows my mind, because the American left, you know, other than people like George Soros and people like that, but the left is just a hobnob of victims groups that are hobbled together, and almost every one of those groups would be destroyed with an Islamic government or Islamic power, even local government, and especially blacks. Like you said, the Islamic, the Arabic word, and I don't know if it's a formal word or a nickname type of thing, but for a black person is slave, right?
Yeah, and I actually put in as an appendix a little segment from Bill Warner's book on slavery in Islam, and you can see that the first word out of a myriad of words is abd, which means a slave, usually a black slave. Abd is also the word for any African or any black person.
And you look what happened.
You have it.
You look what happened in Libya.
This is. I would like to say something very important here, because we had slaves in the Viking era. They were called trell, and a trell was a Viking slave taken from continental Europe and brought to Norway or Denmark or Sweden or Iceland. But in essence, they were the same people. The Romans took slaves, but in essence, they were the same people. But I mean, when you look at the Islamic slave trade, from selling black slaves to America, and the enormous amount of slaves that were taken out of Asia. I mean, we've just talked about Europe, because white female slaves, they were called the white gold, because they brought in the biggest prize. But I mean, we have hundreds of millions of people enslaved at an industrial scale, with absolute horrors of humanity perpetrated by Islam, and you hear nothing about it.
And it's even worse.
And my punchline here is that Christianity in the end conquered slavery and said that slavery was wrong. It eradicated slavery in the Roman Empire, and it eradicated slavery later in America.
It did, and it's even worse. You have Louis Farrakhan talking about all of the oppression and slavery to black people, yet he's representing the people that did it. And I don't think that Islam really looks at the Nation of Islam as a true Islamic organization. I think they laugh at them, but who knows? And you're absolutely right. I mean, this is something where history needs to be taught properly, and it just hasn't been. And I'm sure that we're going to come back to this subject at some point in time, just because it's so vast that an hour doesn't give it justice. I mean, it just doesn't do it. So we covered just about as much as we could in an hour, and again, look to the different references. And there's also a story in there that out of the UK, that 300 more Muslim pedophiles, including councillors, victimizing 1,400 children, discovered, guess where? Rotherham.
In Rotherham, exactly. Yeah. And I mean, this is just another little comma in the history of Islamic exploitation, and it needs to be told. So check out the show notes over at steelcityresistance.com.
Absolutely, and there's a list of links within the show notes links that you will enjoy also. Next week, we are going to talk about something else that you probably hadn't heard of. World War II didn't start in 1939, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to talk about the rape of Nanking and why it is so important to watch the interaction today between North Korea and Japan. The same could be said between South Korea and Japan, but they're not aggravating the situation. But before there was Korea, there was Nanking in China. And so the relations between China and Japan are a little bit easier to understand, and you can see why it's a little more nerve-wracking than maybe the U.S. fake news would allude to. Norway, how can people get in touch with you on social media?
I am at Norway for Trump on Twitter and Gab, and I also have the homepage norwayfortrump.com.
All right. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank everybody who's in on the chat room listening live. And to those of you who listen to the podcast later, that's just fine. Stay tuned for the Wayne Dupree program coming up next. I'm sure we're going to talk about Scottabooch and everything else, politics. But this has been shaping our world, where we stick to history as much as we can on Monday. I'm Hutch Bailey Jr. on Facebook, Berg's Eye View on Twitter. Thanks for coming out, ladies and gentlemen, and thanks for letting us into your life for 1 hour. God bless.
God bless.